Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. The Swiss Guard's rifle cracked against my shoulder as I rolled behind Bernini's marble colonnade. 3 shots rang out from the Vatican's finest. But I was already moving. My name is Garrett Hoffman. And 60 seconds ago, I'd been drinking espresso at a cafe near the Tiber, watching pigeons fight over breadcrumbs while tourists snapped photos of the fountain. Now, I was running for my life through Street Peter Square with a stolen keycard and the most dangerous secret in Catholic history. The keycard had cost me 3 months of undercover work and a favor I'd never be able to repay. Phoenix Martinez had infiltrated the Vatican's administrative offices as a cleaning contractor, spending weeks mapping security protocols and guard rotations. The card belonged to Cardinal Tony, one of only 12 people with access to the Basilica during lockdown periods. "Phoenix, you copy?" I whispered into my earpiece while sprinting between tourists who scattered like startled pigeons. Loud and clear. "Garrett, what's your status?" Phoenix Martinez's voice crackled through the static from our command post 3 blocks away. Slightly I panted, vaulting over a concrete barrier. "The Vatican knows we're here." 2 more guards rounded the corner, assault rifles raised. I fired twice from my Glock, both shots finding their marks in the stone angels above their heads. Marble chips rained down as they dove for cover. These weren't kill shots. We weren't here to murder anyone. We were here for answers. The lockdown had started exactly 43 minutes ago. Every 66 years. Like clockwork, the Vatican sealed Street Peter's Basilica for routine maintenance. No tourists, no pilgrims, no media, just armed guards and a silence that stretched for exactly 72 hours. My boss at the State Department had called it a curiosity. I called it suspicious as hell. I reached the Basilica's main entrance and swiped the stolen keycard. Green light. The massive doors swung open with a pneumatic hiss that seemed to echo from the building's very bones. Inside, the cathedral lay empty except for scaffolding and tarps covering various artworks. Everything looked normal. Too normal. "I'm inside." I radioed to Phoenix. "Good. Remember, you've got 66 minutes before the real security protocols kick in. Whatever they're doing in there, it happens fast." I moved deeper into the Basilica, my footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The famous dome towered above me, but something felt different about the space. The acoustics were wrong. Every sound seemed to bend and twist in ways that made my ears itch. That's when I spotted Dr. Camden Walsh. He was crouched behind the main altar, wearing the same black tactical gear as me. His graying beard was strewn with dust, and his usually perfect hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Walsh was supposed to be dead. I'd watched his helicopter crash into the Mediterranean 6 months ago. "Walsh," I called out, raising my weapon. He looked up and I saw something in his eyes that made my stomach drop. Not fear, not surprise, relief. "Garrett, thank God you're here." He stood slowly, hands visible. "We don't have much time. You're supposed to be dead." I was supposed to be a lot of things. He gestured to the scaffolding around us. "But right now, I'm the only person who knows what happens every 66 years and why the Vatican would kill to keep it secret." More footsteps echoed from the entrance. Our conversation was about to get interrupted. "Talk fast," I said, keeping my gun trained on him while scanning for cover. Walsh pointed to a section of scaffolding near the Pieta. "There's a hidden elevator behind Michelangelo's sculpture. It goes down 12 levels to chambers that don't exist on any blueprint. The Vatican built them in 1506, the same year they started construction on this basilica. What's down there? Something they found buried under the original street. Peter's tomb. Something that's been growing for 2,000 years. The guards were getting closer. I could hear their boots on marble, their radio chatter in rapid Italian. Walsh grabbed my arm. Every 66 years. Tries to break free. The Vatican has to perform a ritual to keep it contained. But this time, he shook his head. This time, something's gone wrong. How wrong? The kind of wrong that could end civilization. I lowered my weapon. Show me. We sprinted to the Pieta. Walsh leading me around the scaffolding to a panel hidden behind the sculpture's base. He pressed his palm against what looked like solid marble, and a section slid away to reveal a sleek elevator shaft. Biometric lock. He explained as we stepped inside. I've been planning this for decades. The elevator descended smoothly. Floor indicators counting down past the official basement levels. B1, B2, B3, all the way to B12. When the doors opened, we stepped into a corridor that looked nothing like the Renaissance splendor above. These walls were older, much older. The stone blocks were massive, fitted together with Roman engineering that had lasted 2 millennia. But carved into every surface were symbols that predated Christianity by centuries. Some looked Egyptian, others resembled cuneiform, and a few seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. The air down here was different, too. Thicker. It carried a metallic taste that coated my tongue and made my sinuses burn. Emergency lighting strips had been installed along the corridors, but they cast strange colors. Blues and greens that made everything look like we were walking through an aquarium. My boots echoed differently on these ancient stones than they had on the marble above. The sound was muffled, absorbed, as if the walls were listening. We passed several side chambers, each one sealed behind modern steel doors with biometric locks. Through reinforced windows, I caught glimpses of artifacts that belonged in museums. Golden tablets covered in hieroglyphs. Stone sculptures that looked like they'd been carved by hands that weren't entirely human. And shelves lined with scrolls that were probably older than written history. What is all this stuff? I asked. Walsh didn't slow down. 2,000 years of collection. Every time they found something connected to the sleeper, they've brought it here, studied it, cataloged it, tried to understand what they were dealing with, and they learned just enough to be terrified. The first pope, Street, Peter himself, was buried above this place for a reason. Walsh explained as we walked deeper into the tunnels. He wasn't just hiding from Roman persecution. He was standing guard. We reached a massive chamber carved from living rock. In the center sat a circular pool filled with what looked like water. But when I knelt beside it, I could see it was perfectly clear glass. And beneath the glass, Jesus Christ. I whispered. Close. Walsh said grimly. But not quite. The thing under the glass was enormous. At first glance, it looked like a tree, a massive root system spreading out in all directions. But as my eyes adjusted to the strange light emanating from the glass itself, I could see that the roots were actually something else entirely. They pulsed with their own rhythm, like a heartbeat made visible. And at the center, where a trunk should be, was something that might have once been human. The scale was hard to comprehend. The pool was at least 50 feet across, and the thing filled every inch of it. Individual appendages were thicker than my torso, branching and rebranching in patterns that hurt to follow. The surface of each tendril was covered in what looked like scales. But when I squinted, I could see they were actually tiny faces, thousands of them, pressed into the organic surface like coins in wet cement. Some of the faces looked Roman with the distinctive features I'd seen on ancient statues. Others appeared more modern, medieval, Renaissance, and even some that could have belonged to people from the last century. All of them had their eyes closed, but their mouths moved constantly as if they were all trying to speak at once. The faces, I whispered, are those everyone who's ever been fully absorbed by its influence. Walsh said grimly, The Vatican's records go back to the 3rd century. Occasionally, someone would get too close, stay too long during the containment rituals. They'd become part of the collective, the central mass. The thing that might have once been human was even more disturbing. It was roughly the size and shape of a person, but stretched and distorted like reflection in a funhouse mirror. Arms that were too long, a torso that curved in directions human spines couldn't bend, and a head that was both too large and somehow folded in on itself. When it shifted position, I caught a glimpse of what might have been an eye opening somewhere in that twisted anatomy. It was looking directly at me. What is it? The Vatican calls it the sleeper. According to their records, it was already here when the Romans built their first settlement. It's been dormant for centuries, but every 66 years, it stirs, tries to wake up fully. I stood up, my knees shaking, and the ritual keeps it asleep. Used to. But look at this. Walsh pointed to hairline cracks spreading across the glass surface. The containment is failing. Has been for decades. Each cycle it gets a little stronger. This time a deep vibration ran through the floor beneath our feet. The thing under the glass shifted, and I swear I saw what might have been an eye open somewhere in that mass of organic architecture. This time it might actually wake up. I finished. And if it does, every human being on the planet dies within 48 hours. Another vibration stronger this time. Dust rained from the ancient ceiling and the cracks in the glass spread wider. How do we stop it? Walsh pulled a leather journal from his tactical vest. I've been studying the Vatican's records for 30 years. There is a way, but it requires. He hesitated. It requires someone to take its place. What do you mean? The sleeper feeds on human consciousness. It's been sustaining itself on the collective unconscious of Rome's population for 2,000 years. But it's not enough anymore. The world has too many people now. Too many minds for it to influence while staying dormant. The vibrations were coming regularly now. Like breathing. Whatever was down there was definitely waking up. So, what's the solution? Someone has to go into the glass. Become part of its dream. Channel its hunger into a single human consciousness instead of letting it loose on the world. I stared at him. You're talking about suicide. I'm talking about sacrifice. The person who goes in becomes the new guardian. They don't die. They just change. Become something else. Something that can keep it sleeping for another few centuries. A crack like thunder split the air and a section of the glass wall shattered completely. Dark fluid poured out and the smell hit us like a physical blow. It smelled like copper and ozone and something else. Something organic that had been rotting for millennia. The sleeper was definitely waking up. We need to get out of here, I said, grabbing Walsh's arm. No, you don't understand. Once it's fully awake, nowhere on Earth will be safe. It doesn't just kill people. Changes them. Turns them into extensions of itself. Within hours, every human being becomes part of its network. More glass shattered. The thing in the pool was definitely moving now. Those root-like appendages stretching toward the surface. And I could swear I heard something like singing. A wordless melody that made my teeth ache. How long do we have? Walsh checked his watch. Based on previous cycles. Maybe 20 minutes before full awakening. And the ritual takes 30 minutes minimum. We're already too late for the traditional approach. I looked around the chamber. My mind racing. What about the non-traditional approach? Walsh opened his journal and flipped to a page covered in handwritten notes. There is one other option. Instead of putting it back to sleep, we could try to kill it permanently. I like that option better. It would require destroying the containment completely, letting it wake up fully, then hitting it with everything the Vatican has been stockpiling for 5 centuries, such as holy water blessed by every pope since 1506. artifacts from the original street, Peter's tomb. And he hesitated. A nuclear device. I blinked. The Vatican has a nuke. The Vatican has had contingency plans for this scenario since 1945. If the sleeper ever became too dangerous to contain, they were authorized to use any means necessary. More cracks spread across the remaining glass. The singing was getting louder, and I could feel it vibrating in my bones. Whatever was happening to the thing in the pool, it was accelerating. Where's the device? Level B8. But Garrett, you need to understand. Detonating it down here would take out half of Rome. Better than taking out the entire planet. Walsh nodded grimly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. We ran back to the elevator, the sound of breaking glass echoing behind us. As we rose to B8, Walsh explained the Vatican's doomsday protocol. For centuries, they'd been preparing for the possibility that the sleeper might become too powerful to contain. The nuclear option was always their last resort. The device is hidden inside a replica of St. Peter's tomb, Walsh said as we stepped into another ancient corridor. It's been armed and ready for 60 years. All we need to do is activate the timer. We found the tomb in a small chamber lined with religious artifacts. It looked exactly like the tourist version upstairs, except this one had a modern digital interface hidden behind the stone inscription. How long can we set the timer for? I asked. Minimum is 10 minutes. Maximum is 48 hours. I thought about the distance to the surface, the guards between us and freedom, and the fact that Phoenix was still waiting for my report. Set it for 20 minutes. That gives us time to get clear and warn everyone. Walsh's fingers flew over the digital controls. Done. 20 minutes and counting. A new sound echoed up from the depths below us. A roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sleeper was definitely awake now. Move, I said. We sprinted for the elevator. But when we reached it, the car was gone. Someone had called it to another floor. Stairs, Walsh said, pointing to a narrow stone staircase I hadn't noticed before. We climbed 12 flights of ancient steps, my lungs burning and my legs cramping. Behind us, the roaring was getting louder. Whatever was happening in the deep chambers, it was spreading upward. We burst through a door into the main basilica just as my earpiece crackled to life. Garrett, where the hell are you? Something's happening in the city. People are acting strange. I looked out through the basilica's windows and saw crowds of people in St. Peter's Square moving in perfect unison. All facing the same direction. All completely silent. Phoenix, get everyone out of Rome right now. What's going on? The thing we came to investigate is awake. And we've got 18 minutes before this whole area becomes a crater. Walsh grabbed my arm. We need to get to the roof. The helicopter pad. There's a helicopter pad. Emergency evacuation protocol. If the containment ever failed, key personnel were supposed to evacuate via air. We ran through the empty basilica, our footsteps echoing off the walls. The singing from below was getting louder, and I could feel it affecting my thoughts. Images flashed through my mind. Things I'd never seen. Places I'd never been. Faces I didn't recognize. The sleeper was trying to establish a connection. Don't listen to it, Walsh warned, apparently experiencing the same thing. It's trying to map our consciousness. We found a service elevator that took us up to the roof. When the doors opened, we stepped out into brilliant sunlight and the sound of helicopter rotors. A Vatican security team was already loading equipment into a military transport chopper. When they saw us, several guards raised their weapons. It's okay, Walsh shouted over the rotor noise. I'm Dr. Camden Walsh, Special Envoy to the Holy See. This man is with me. One of the guards, a stern-faced woman with captain's insignia, approached us. Dr. Walsh, you're supposed to be dead. That was temporary. Captain, we need immediate evacuation. The containment has failed. Her face went pale. Full protocol. Full protocol. 20-minute countdown. She nodded and waved us toward the helicopter. Move. 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 We strapped ourselves in as the chopper lifted off. Through the windows, I could see Street, Peter's Square filling with more people, all moving with that same eerie coordination. The sleeper's influence was spreading. Garrett. Phoenix's voice crackled through my earpiece. I'm seeing mass behavioral changes across the city. What did you find down there? Something that's been asleep for 2,000 years. We woke it up. But we also set a timer to make sure it goes back to sleep permanently. What kind of timer? I looked at Walsh, who was checking his watch. 15 minutes remaining. The kind that glows in the dark. Through the helicopter's windows, I watched Rome spread out below us. Millions of people, all going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. In 15 minutes, they'd either be free of the sleeper's influence forever or they'd all be dead. I thought about the people in my life. My sister Dakota back in Colorado. My partner Sienna at the State Department. My old college buddy Bryce, who'd probably never even heard of the Vatican. They were all depending on a decision I'd made in an underground chamber while something older than Christianity tried to eat my thoughts. Walsh leaned over and shouted over the helicopter noise. Second thoughts. I looked back toward Street. Peter's Basilica. Now a tiny dot on the landscape. Ask me in 14 minutes. The helicopter banked sharply to the east, carrying us away from Rome as fast as its engines could manage. Below us, the city continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that their ancient guardian was about to wake up from a 2,000-year nap. Captain Rivera was pushing the aircraft to its limits. I could feel the strain in the engine vibrations, hear it in the way the rotors cut through the air. The instrument panel showed we were flying at maximum rated speed, but it still didn't feel fast enough. Through the side windows, I watched the Italian countryside blur past. Ancient farmhouses, vineyards, small towns where people were probably sitting down to lunch. All of them blissfully unaware that their world was balanced on the edge of a knife. Garrett. Phoenix's voice crackled through my earpiece with an urgency I'd never heard before. I'm monitoring emergency frequencies across the city. This is bigger than we thought. How much bigger? I'm picking up reports from hospitals about patients experiencing simultaneous seizures. Air traffic control says pilots are requesting emergency clearance to land in Rome. But they can't explain why. And the police are getting calls about mass gatherings in every major square in the city. Walsh was staring at his journal, his face pale. It's not just Street, Peter's Square. The sleeper's influence is spreading through the city's entire population. I looked down at Rome, spread out like a map below us. From this height, the city looked peaceful, beautiful even. The Tiber wound through it like a silver ribbon, connecting ancient neighborhoods to modern districts. But if Phoenix was right, every person down there was slowly falling under the influence of something that had been dreaming of freedom for 2 millennia. How many people live in Rome? I asked. About 3 million in the metropolitan area. Rhea called back from the pilot seat. 3 million minds, all slowly synchronizing with an entity that viewed human consciousness as food. The math was staggering. Or go back to sleep forever. Either way, in 13 minutes, we'd have our answer. 12 minutes. The helicopter's radio crackled with emergency broadcasts from across Rome. Reports of people walking into traffic, abandoning their cars, leaving their children standing alone while they wandered toward Street. Peter's Square. The sleeper's influence was spreading faster than we'd anticipated. Captain Rivera Walsh shouted to the pilot. How far are we from the minimum safe distance? 8 kilometers in climbing. Sir. Should be clear of immediate blast radius in 90 seconds. I watched the city shrink below us and tried not to think about the families down there. The couples having lunch. The kids playing in parks. The tourists taking selfies in front of fountains. In 11 minutes, they'd either return to normal or become part of the crater. Phoenix status report. I called into my earpiece. Garrett. It's getting worse. I've got visual on street. Peter Square, and there are maybe 50. 000 people just standing there. Not moving. Not talking. Just waiting. Walsh checked his watch again. 10 minutes. The device should detonate in exactly 10 minutes. That's when Captain Rivera's voice cut through the helicopter noise with the kind of urgency that makes your stomach drop. Sir, we've got a problem. I'm reading multiple aircraft approaching Rome from all directions. I looked out the window and saw them. Commercial airliners that had diverted from their flight paths. Military jets. Private helicopters. Everything with wings converging on the city like metal moths drawn to flame. It's calling them. Walsh said grimly, the sleeper isn't just affecting people on the ground. It's reaching out through air traffic control. Pilot consciousness. Anyone connected to getting people to Rome. Can we stop them? Not without shooting down civilian aircraft. Captain Rivera's voice was tight with controlled panic. Sir, I count at least 40 incoming flights. If they all land or crash in the city, how many people? I asked. Tens of thousands. Maybe more. I did the math. 10 minutes until detonation. 50. 000 people already in the square. Plus however many passengers were currently flying toward Rome. The numbers made my head spin. Walsh was studying his journal again. Flipping through pages of handwritten notes. There might be another way. Talk. The sleeper feeds on consciousness. But it also broadcasts through it. If we could find a way to amplify the nuclear detonation through its own network. You mean use the people it's controlling as conductors? Exactly. Instead of just destroying the physical entity. We could send the blast through its mental connections. Kill it across its entire influence range. Captain Rivera called back to us. 6 minutes to minimum safe distance. But those aircraft are going to start landing in 4 minutes. I looked at Walsh. How do we amplify the blast? He pointed to a section in his journal covered with technical diagrams. The Vatican has been studying this thing for centuries. They've got broadcast equipment in the Basilica's bell towers. Originally designed to disrupt the sleeper mental influence during the containment rituals. Can we reverse it? Instead of blocking its signal. Boost our own. In theory, yes. But someone would have to get back to the Basilica and manually override the system. I looked out at the city. Then at the helicopter's controls. How hard is it to fly one of these things? Walsh stared at me. You can't be serious. Captain Rivera. Can you put this bird on autopilot and hover at minimum safe distance? Sir. I cannot recommend. That wasn't a recommendation request. She hesitated. Then nodded. Yes, sir. But if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, you've got maybe 6 minutes to get in. Override the system. And get clear before detonation. How long to fly back to the Basilica? 3 minutes in this bird. That left 3 minutes to find the broadcast equipment. Override the system. And somehow escape before a nuclear device turned the area into a glass crater. Not great odds. But better than letting the sleeper wake up fully. Do it, I said. Captain Rivera engaged the autopilot and moved away from the controls. I slipped into the pilot seat and tried to remember everything I'd learned during military flight training 15 years ago. The controls felt familiar under my hands. Muscle memory kicking in despite the years. Garrett. Phoenix's voice crackled through my earpiece. Please tell me you're not about to do something stupid. Define stupid. Flying back toward a nuclear explosion. I banked the helicopter hard left. Turning back toward Rome. Okay. Then yes. I'm definitely about to do something stupid. Walsh strapped himself in tighter. The broadcast controls are in the north bell tower. There's a service ladder that goes up from the roof access we used earlier. And once I override the system, the amplification should be automatic. When the device detonates, instead of just destroying the sleeper's physical form, the blast will propagate through every consciousness it's touched. Below us, Rome was getting bigger again. I could see the crowds in St. Peter's Square. Thousands of people standing in perfect formation like pieces on a chessboard. Aircraft were circling overhead, preparing to land at airports that were probably being run by people under the sleeper influence. For minutes to detonation, Walsh called out. I pushed the helicopter to maximum speed. The Vatican appeared ahead of us, the Basilica's dome gleaming in the afternoon sun. From this height, it looked peaceful, beautiful, even. Nothing like the nightmare we'd left in the chambers below. 3 minutes. I brought the helicopter down fast, landing hard on the roof where we'd taken off. The moment the skids touched concrete, I was out and running for the roof access door. Garrett. Walsh shouted after me. The North Tower. Look for a panel marked with papal seal. I sprinted across the roof, my boots slipping on the ancient tiles. The door to the Basilica's interior was still propped open from our earlier escape. I dove through it and found the service ladder Walsh had mentioned. The climb up the North Bell Tower felt like it took forever. But my watch said it was only 30 seconds. At the top, I found myself in a cramped space filled with bronze bells and hidden behind the largest one. A modern control panel marked with the Vatican's coat of arms. 2 minutes to detonation. I opened the panel and found myself staring at switches and displays that looked like they belonged on a submarine. Everything was labeled in Latin, which didn't help. But Walsh had said the amplification would be automatic. I just needed to override the system. There was a large red switch labeled Amplificare. That seemed promising. I flipped it. Every bell in the tower started ringing at once. The sound was deafening. But underneath it, I could hear something else. A low humming that seemed to come from the air itself. The broadcast system was working. 1 minute. I started climbing back down the ladder. But halfway down, I realized I wasn't going to make it. Even if I ran at full speed, I'd still be inside the blast radius when the device went off. That's when I heard Phoenix's voice in my earpiece. Garrett, I've got a visual on you from the south. There's a zip line running from the bell tower to the colonnade maintenance line for working on the dome. I looked out the tower window and saw it. A steel cable running from my position to a point on the far side of the square. It was definitely within the blast radius. But it was also moving away from ground zero. 30 seconds. I grabbed the maintenance harness hanging next to the window and clipped it to the zip line. Through the window, I could see the crowds in the square starting to look up. Their synchronized movement finally broken. The amplification was working. The sleeper control was wavering. The harness was designed for maintenance workers, not emergency escapes. The straps were worn and the buckles protested as I tightened them with shaking hands. Through the window, St. Peter's Square looked impossibly far away. The zip line stretched across hundreds of feet of empty air. A thin steel cable that would either carry me to safety or drop me into the blast zone. 20 seconds. I took a deep breath and looked down one last time. The crowd in the square was definitely changing. Instead of standing in perfect formation, people were starting to move independently. Some were pointing at the sky. Others were helping confused family members. And a few were already walking toward the exits. The spell was breaking, but not fast enough. I jumped. The zip line carried me out over St. Peter's Square at tremendous speed. The wind tore at my clothes and made my eyes water. But I could see everything with crystal clarity. Below me, thousands of people were shaking their heads, looking around in confusion, as if waking from a dream. The aircraft circling overhead were banking away from the city, their pilots apparently back in control. The harness cut into my shoulders and thighs as I picked up speed. The zip line was steeper than I'd realized, and I was flying toward the far end of the square like a human missile. At this rate, I was going to hit the colonnade hard enough to break every bone in my body. But that was assuming I lived long enough to reach it. 10 seconds. I was halfway across the square when the world turned white. The nuclear detonation wasn't just an explosion. It was a wave of pure energy that I could feel in every cell of my body. But instead of vaporizing everything in its path, the blast seemed to bend and twist through the air, following paths that weren't quite physical. The light was blinding, but I could see through it somehow. Streams of energy were racing outward from the Basilica, connecting to people across the square, across the city. The amplification system was working exactly as Walsh had predicted. The nuclear blast was traveling through the sleeper network, following its mental connections to every consciousness it had touched. I could feel it happening in my own mind. For just an instant, I was connected to the network. Too. I could sense the presence of millions of other minds, all linked together in a web of shared consciousness. And at the center of it all, I felt the sleeper itself, ancient, vast, and absolutely terrified as nuclear fire raced through its being. Then the connection snapped, and I was just a man in a harness flying through the air above a crowd of confused tourists. The energy wave passed through me without harm, but I could feel its effects. Every muscle in my body relaxed at once, as if I'd just woken up from the deepest sleep of my life. The sleeper's influence, something I hadn't even realized I'd been feeling, was gone completely. I hit the ground hard on the far side of the square, rolling to absorb the impact. The harness straps had cut into my skin, and my left shoulder felt like it might be dislocated. But everything seemed to be working. Around me, confused tourists and Romans were looking around like they'd just woken up from a very strange dream. Phoenix. I called into my earpiece. Status report. Garrett. You magnificent bastard. It worked. The crowds are dispersing. Aircraft are returning to normal flight patterns. Whatever you did, killed the signal. I stood up slowly, checking for broken bones. Everything seemed to be working. Around me, confused tourists and Romans were looking around like they'd just woken up from a very strange dream. Walsh's voice came through the helicopter radio. Garrett, the deep sensors are showing zero activity. The sleeper is gone. Not dormant. Actually dead. I looked back at the Basilica, its dome still gleaming in the afternoon sun. Somewhere far beneath it, the chambers that had housed humanity's secret nightmare for 2,000 years were empty. The Vatican's vigil was over. Phoenix. Prep the extraction team. We're going home. As I walked toward the designated pickup point, I thought about the people around me. Families reuniting after wandering off in a trance. Pilots radioing confused reports about why they'd suddenly decided to fly to Rome. Children asking their parents why everyone had been standing so still. They'd never know how close they'd come to losing everything. Never know that their entire species had been balanced on the edge of extinction while something older than civilization tried to wake up from its ancient sleep. That was probably for the best. My earpiece crackled one more time. Garrett. This is command. Excellent work. Come home. I looked up at the clear blue sky over Rome, then started walking toward my ride home. The city was returning to normal around me. Tourists taking pictures, vendors selling postcards, priests hurrying toward evening services. Just another beautiful day in the eternal city. The Vatican would have to figure out what to do with 12 levels of empty chambers beneath St. Peter's Basilica. Maybe they'd seal them permanently, or maybe they'd find some other use for all that space. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd saved the world before lunch and still had time to catch my flight back to Washington. Not bad for a Tuesday. 3 hours later, I was sitting in first class with a bourbon and soda, watching Italy disappear beneath the clouds. Phoenix was in the seat next to me, debriefing with headquarters via secure satellite link. The flight attendant had offered me an ice pack for my shoulder, but I declined. The pain helped me focus, helped me believe that everything that had happened in the last 6 hours was real. The other passengers had no idea they were sharing a plane with someone who just saved the world. They were business travelers and tourists, reading magazines and watching movies, complaining about the airline food and arguing over armrest space. Normal human problems. Beautiful, ordinary human concerns. I'd been thinking about that a lot during the flight, about how close we'd all come to losing everything that makes us human. The sleeper hadn't just wanted to kill us. It had wanted to absorb us, turn us into extensions of its own consciousness. Every person on this plane, every person in the cities below us, everyone they'd ever loved or would love, all of it would have been consumed. So, what's the official story? I asked when Phoenix finished her call. Gas leak in the Vatican's maintenance tunnels caused some temporary disorientation among visitors, but no lasting effects. The area's been sealed for safety inspections. And Walsh, officially, he's still dead. Unofficially, he's being debriefed by people with much higher security clearances than us. I took another sip of bourbon and thought about the thing we'd found in those deep chambers. The sleeper had been down there for 2 millennia, feeding on human consciousness, growing stronger with every generation. If we hadn't found it when we did, how many people knew? I asked about the sleeper, maybe a dozen Vatican officials, a few researchers like Walsh, and now us. It's been the world's best-kept secret for 500 years. And now it's just another Tuesday. Phoenix smiled. The best kind of Tuesday. The kind where civilization doesn't end. I raised my glass to boring Tuesdays. To boring Tuesdays. We clinked glasses 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean while the sun set behind us. Below, millions of people were going about their evening routines, completely unaware that they'd been briefly connected to something that could have consumed their minds and turned them into extensions of an ancient intelligence. They were watching TV, cooking dinner, helping kids with homework, arguing about politics, falling in love, getting divorced, being human in all the messy, complicated ways that make humanity worth saving. The sleeper was gone. The Vatican secret was safe. And I had a date with a cold beer and a hot shower as soon as we landed. Sometimes the good guys actually win. I settled back in my seat and closed my eyes, letting the plane carry me home to a world that was exactly the same as it had been yesterday, except for the fact that it was going to keep existing. That seemed like a pretty good trade-off. Thank you for listening to this entry from the Wilderness Protocol. If you made it through this report and wish to be briefed on future incidents, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel.